So what's going on, guys? DIY Dan here again, and this is another episode of Day to Day Around the House. So I ended up developing a drip coming out of the bathtub faucet in our second bathroom / shower. This drip got continuously worse and worse to the point of I was wasting too much water and I needed to fix that leak. So in this video, I'm going to be showing you how to replace the cartridge assembly on a Moen showerhead / bath faucet. So I'm going to go over step-by-step removal and installation, including helpful tips that I figured out and mistakes I made, so hopefully you guys don't make those same mistakes as I did. So let's get to it.
So the first thing you will need to do is go shut off your main water supply going to the house. And then it's a good idea to open that hose bib at that location, and that will bleed off any residual pressure that is in the house.
It also gives a place for any extra water volume to drain off that might be bypassing by that ball valve or shutoff valve, because those do tend to leak a little bit over the years and not seal 100%.
You'll also want to turn on the shower head that you are fixing to let it bleed off any residual water that's still in the piping in the wall.
Make sure you leave it on cold for a while and make sure it's done draining there, and then move it over to hot and do the same thing to make sure you get all the water out of the pipes from both hot and cold.
Before any disassembly, I highly recommend blocking your drain either with a stopper or a rag or something so no small parts that you might drop make it down into your drain.
The other thing I highly recommend, and I do it just because I make these videos, but is take pictures or take videos of the disassembly of everything you're doing. That way you can use it as a reference when going back together as far as what piece goes next, or checking the orientation of a part to make sure you put it back on correctly.
You'll want to position that handle straight up. That will allow you the easiest way to get to the Allen head bolt that holds that handle to the shutoff valve. Make sure you take your time in choosing the correct Allen wrench so you don't strip it out, because that would lead to a whole nother can of worms that you don't want to deal with.
If it seems like you're stripping out that Allen head bolt, here's some helpful tips that might help you out. The first thing you might want to try is taking a small pick or a small flathead screwdriver and digging into the head of the Allen head bolt to remove any debris or calcium buildup from the hard water over the years. It also might be a good idea to take some WD-40 and just squirt a little bit down inside the hole. Let that penetrating oil work its way in there for about 5 to 10 minutes and then try it again.
Once you fully remove that bolt, then that handle should just pull off. Here's the part number of the replacement cartridge that I got for this faucet. Once you have removed the handle, then you will need a Phillips screwdriver to remove a single screw that holds a black plastic cap onto the shutoff valve. Then there's going to be a plastic spacer that you will need to remove and a decorative sleeve. There's a retaining clip that holds the cartridge in place. The instructions show that you don't need to remove the decorative cover that's attached to the wall. I could not get that clip off without removing it. So there's 2 Phillips screws that hold that decorative cover in place. I started out by using a regular Phillips screwdriver to do this until I realized these bolts were almost 2 inches long, and then I switched over to my drill. Once those are removed, you might need to get a razor blade in order to cut the caulking seal that is around that plate. Once you do that, you should be able to grab that cover and just pull it off. I ended up using a small flathead screwdriver to leverage up that clip. A small pair of needle nose would probably also work good. Now, this project had gone pretty well up until this point. I did struggle getting this cartridge out of the shutoff valve, and there was a couple reasons for that. Now, one of those reasons was I was a dumbass and didn't thoroughly read through the entire instruction pamphlet before trying to remove this cartridge. You can see here that there's a removal tool that you slide over the shaft and twist that cartridge in the shutoff valve to help break loose those seals. So that's definitely worth doing first, and then hopefully you can just grab a pair of pliers and it should come right out. If that doesn't happen, you end up with a situation like I've got going on here. I ended up clamping a pair of vice grips to the shaft coming out of the cartridge, and then cutting 2 blocks of wood to length where I could put those against the shutoff valve itself, and then use 2 pry bars to leverage against the vice grips to break loose that seal. The place where I'm putting those blocks is right against this part of the shutoff valve, so you're leveraging off of the same thing you're trying to pull the cartridge out of. You might be able to just get away with prying off of one side of that shutoff valve, but you will get more pressure if you do both sides equally. I ended up having to cut out a couple different size blocks because I would run out of leverage.
And if you do end up having to be creative like I did with trying to get this one out, make sure you're not leveraging or pushing or pulling on the lines going to that shutoff valve, because you definitely don't want to end up with a leak on one of those lines dripping behind the wall. You won't realize it until there's probably some pretty serious damage like drywall, mold, etc. Once I got it out far enough where I could grab the plastic part of the cartridge, then I worked that back and forth and eventually got it to pop the seals loose. Once I had it out past the first seal, I took some WD-40 and put it on that seal and then pushed it back in and out a couple times, and that seemed to really help break it free. What I should have done is used a food grade oil like vegetable oil or something, just so there was no chance of contaminating the water in the pipes, even though I doubt that really happened, and anything that did get in there was going out the faucet. You'll notice that as I pull this cartridge out, a piece of one of the seals actually falls out. Both of the outer seals on that cartridge were ripped, and that's probably due to the fact that once I removed that clip, I did not put that removal tool and twist it to break loose those seals before trying to pull the cartridge out. So make sure you do use that removal tool to break loose those seals. So mistake number 2 I made, which I didn't think this would happen, is when I actually got that valve to pull out, I had thought since I had opened that up and let it bleed off everything, that I was good to go as far as water being done draining out of the pipes. However, when I pulled that cartridge out, I must have broke a siphon on the system and a couple gallons of water still came puking out of that shutoff valve. I used my hand at first, and then I just used the actual cover plate to divert that water to make sure none went down inside the wall. Now this much water draining out after I pulled the cartridge could have been due to the fact that I did not open up my garden hose attachment when I opened up the hose bib on the side of the house when shutting the water off. But be prepared for this in case it does happen to you. I shined a flashlight inside the valve and noticed that there was still a piece of a seal that was stuck inside that valve. I got it out using a small pair of needle nose and then put those seals together like a puzzle to make sure I was missing no other pieces of those seals. Then using some real fine sandpaper, I actually used 320 grit. I wrapped that around my finger and then cleaned out the inside of the shutoff valve. Over the years with hard water can create calcium deposits inside that brass shutoff valve, which could prevent the new seals from having a nice smooth surface to seal against. It is very critical to make sure you use some super fine sandpaper. You don't want to use anything coarse and possibly scar the inside of that brass fitting and create a bigger problem than actually fixing the problem. Once getting that all cleaned out, I did put the new one and the old one right next to each other to make sure everything matched up identically before installing it back into the brass shutoff valve. That Moen cartridge kit did come with a little package of lubricant that you will apply to all the seals on the new cartridge before sliding it into place. So this cartridge does have a top and bottom. The HC of the cartridge goes at the top of the shutoff valve. Make sure it is timed appropriately before sliding it into position. You do not want to rotate it once you have it in there. It should slide into place a lot easier than what it came out. If it does not, then you need to make sure the inside of that shutoff valve is nice and clean. Applying a small amount of force, it went in 99% of the way. I got the retaining clip started on the top side, then had to apply a little bit more force and then go ahead and push it the rest of the way down into position. You need to make sure you get that clip in all the way. There is a little detent and you should hear that when it is fully locked in. The rest of the assembly is all for decorative reasons, so you can turn your water back on at this point. This isn't absolutely necessary at this point, but it is a good idea if you have any doubts about the way the cartridge went in the valve to check for water leaks before you take the time to cover it up. And then you won't be able to notice whether you have a water leak behind the wall, which could possibly create mold and water damage, which could be a costly repair. If you do decide to turn your main water supply back on to check for leaks, don't forget to turn the actual shutoff valve to the off position so it's not leaking while you're doing that. And you can always put the black plastic cover on and use that to turn it on and off to make it easier. Once you have verified you got a nice positive seal and there's no leaks on your new cartridge install, you will want to shut that water valve back off to finish the assembly. So right here I'm just cleaning the old caulking off the wall. I'm actually using a razor scraper, but if you're worried about scratching your shower, you could also use just a regular scraper. I put on the cover and started the screws. I use my drill to put these screws in because I can set the torque setting super low so I don't over tighten them. Remember that this is just a decorative cover. You're just holding that on, because if you do over tighten these, you could kind of bend your shower wall depending on the type of shower wall you have. I put the plastic retainer in the sleeve and then slid those both on with that notch pointing straight up in the same orientation I took them off. Then I put that final plastic cover in position that the handle attaches to. Before tightening the screw down on that, I made sure that the timing was correct as far as the hot and cold. Once verifying that, I went ahead and put the screw in and tightened it down. Then all that's left to do is go ahead and put the handle back on. I did take a small pick and dig out the head of that Allen head one more time just to make sure I had a good grip using the Allen wrench. There's a groove in the handle that lines up with a groove in that plastic cover, and then the screw goes right through a hole in that cover. Just put that handle in a nice easy place to get to. Once again, I'm just snugging this bolt down. You don't want to tighten it down too much. The main reason I say that is if you ever have to take it off again, you don't want to strip it out trying to get it off next time. So before replacing this cartridge, not only was it dripping and leaking all the time, but it was also getting hard to turn. And you can see how easily this handle is turning now that it's been replaced. Then all that's left to do is caulk that in so you don't get any water dripping down behind the wall. I usually do a final wipe down with some rubbing alcohol on a rag to make sure I have a nice clean dry surface to apply the new caulking. And make sure you do use a caulking that's specifically designed for kitchen and bath. I always say apply a thin layer and then spread it out with your finger. You can always apply more, but if you put too much on to begin with, you can make a big mess and it just doesn't look good. Then go ahead and turn your main water supply back on that final time. And that's about all there is to it, guys. Hopefully you enjoyed this video and it gave you some good information. If so, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. I'd really appreciate it. The whole concept of my channel is to give you guys the most information in the least amount of time as possible so I don't waste your time. And I hope to see you next time. Have a good one. Later.